Hello, everyone, and welcome to this card review for Rise of the Shadows. We're going to be starting off here with the neutral cards. We're going to be rating cards on a 1 to 5 scale, and since the specialist format has come in as well, I'm going to be considering some cards as tech cards or sideboard cards. So I might give some cards that grade rather than a specific 1 to 5 scale. Basically, 1 is going to be for cards that are absolute trash, never really going to see play. 2 is for cards that maybe see a bit of fringe play, maybe in only specific decks. 3 are cards that are good in specific decks, so they might just be a core card in a decent deck, but not really the reason you want to play that deck. 4 are kind of either the cards that are very good in multiple decks or the cards that are kind of deck defining themselves. And 5 are our like meta defining cards. These are the cards that warp that are not only important for the decks they're in, but they actually change how the rest of the meta builds their decks. So with that scale in mind, let's start off here with Archivist Elysiana. Archivist Elysiana is an 8-mana 7/7 legendary minion with Battle Cry. Discover 5 cards, replace your deck with 2 copies of each. So you're basically getting yourself a new deck here. Obviously, doing this early in the game is not, or like, this is not something you're ever going to want to do on turn 8, right? I mean, that's the earliest you can reasonably do it, or with 8 mana. And discovering cards is actually not that great. I mean, most of the time you're going to get class cards, but when you get neutrals, there's going to be a lot of junk in there. So there's going to be a lot of bad outcomes that you could get there. Mostly what this card is going to be for, though, is for like control mirrors, for getting value when you're close to fatigue. So basically you're going to be playing this as you run out of cards. In like a control mirror, so that you can maximize the number of cards in your deck, minimize the fatigue damage you take. If you have this and your opponent doesn't, and you've managed to keep it all even up until now, then you should be able to win out in fatigue. Now, how often that really happens is kind of the issue with this card. I don't expect it to happen very much on ladder, so I don't really think most people are going to see Archivist Elysiana all that much. I think that it's definitely something we're more going to see in specialist format as a sideboard tech for decks that want to be able to go late into the game against other control decks. And in which case, that's a bit worrying because you both tech it and then they kind of cancel each other out in a way. And maybe whoever gets the better threats and responses from the 5 cards matters more. So it might be better in certain classes where you have some more removal to deal with stuff like that, like in Priest, where you can get Shadow Word Death, for instance, to remove minions, or like even Mind Control, for that late in the game when basically all you either of you have left as resources are these Archivist Elysiana cards. So I think it's going to differ a bit in the decks. I think this is a card that I kind of just have to give the sideboard grading to. I think it's a good sideboard card. Like if I had to rate this, it'd probably be about a 3. But as itself, I think it's not something you really want to put in most decks. So it's probably like a 2 outside of a 2 in, or even maybe a 1 for like ladder. But for specialist, it is going to be a bit more of a sideboard card. So I think it edges a little bit towards a 3 there as a result. So 3 is kind of the overall grade I would give it. Next up, we have Archmage Vargoth. Archmage Vargoth is a 4-mana 2/6 legendary minion. At the end of your turn, cast a spell you've cast this turn. Targets are random. So there's a lot of interesting implications with Archmage Vargoth. He actually just went live in the game as the patch went out now, but I haven't had a chance to actually play with him yet. So I can't really speak from experience. Everyone is going to be getting a copy of Archmage Vargoth as well. So as long as you log in, you're going to get a copy. So everyone's going to be able to try this card out for themselves right now, in fact. Never mind waiting for the reviews. But this review is going to be keeping in mind what he's going to be like once the rotation actually happens. And there are quite a few solid cards. that work well with Archmage Vargoth. I think it's not a card that necessarily defines how you build a deck. It's not ridiculously meta defining in that kind of sense, but it is something that will be in quite a lot of decks, obviously across a lot of classes, being that it's neutral. I think this might be the best neutral legendary in this set as well. So I'm going to give Archmage Vargoth a 4. I think there's a lot of ways to build and to make him work. You kind of have to work around that random tag, but I don't think you have to change how you're building your deck too much in order to get some decent value out of Archmage Vargoth. And with 6 health on a 4 mana card, sometimes he will actually just stick on curve, and then it's going to be very difficult for your opponents to deal with. And you can at least get some more immediate value. It's not really going to be a curve play very often, so if you're playing it on 4, you pretty much need to have a really good spell to follow up with on 5. But yeah, otherwise, Archmage Vargoth I think is a fairly solid card, so I'm going to give Archmage Vargoth a 4. Although I think it's a card that might kind of originally see play in decks and then slip out a bit as the meta evolves and the decks refine themselves. But I think it'll definitely be a card that will be useful in expansions to come as well. Next we have Barista Linchen. Barista Linchen is a 5 mana 4/5 legendary minion with battle cry. Add a copy of each other battle cry minions to your hand. Each of your other battlecry minions to your hand. So these are your battlecry minions on the board. So you actually need to stick a bunch of battlecry minions to the board. The problem with that being that battlecry minions are usually understated for their cost, because part of their cost is, or the battlecry effect is kind of worked into their cost, which means that to get really big value out of Barista Linchen is kind of difficult. I think that whilst it might be a useful card in certain decks that basically just tend to play a lot of battle cries naturally, I don't think it's actually a card that you want to go out of your way to build a deck around. There aren't any super ridiculous combos. I mean, there's a lot of value you can get out of getting extra copies of some battle cry cards, but a lot of them are not necessarily going to stick to the board in the first place anyway after you play them. And a lot of the biggest value generating cards are not necessarily battle cry cards anyway. So I think Barista Linchen is a 3 at best, but overall I would say she's probably more of a 2 for me. I think she'll probably only really see some Fringe play. Next we have Chef Nomi. Chef Nomi is a 7 mana 6/6 legendary with battle cry. If your deck is empty, summon 6/6 Greasefire elementals. So Chef Nomi is a card that realistically is something you kind of want to play against control decks as you go into Fatigue, but a lot of control decks are going to be able to keep answers for this. So rushing yourself to Fatigue in a control mirror so you can play Chef Nomi is not really going to work. The other one consideration is in Rogue, where you can use Myra's Unstable Element to empty your deck very quickly. I mean, if you have Chef Nomi in hand and you play Myra's on 6, you can play Chef Nomi immediately on 7 for a pretty ridiculous board. But at the sacrifice of your entire deck means that if your opponent is able to respond to that first Chef Nomi board with something like a Brawl or a Mass Hysteria, which Chef Nomi plays very directly into, then you're going to be a little bit stranded for resources unless you have other ways of getting cards back into your deck. So I think Chef Nomi, I think this is a card that is going to debate a lot of people. I think it's probably closer to a 1, but I'm going to give it a 2 because I think it might see a little bit of Fringe play, but I don't think it's a good card at all. Next up we have Geppetto Joybuzz. Geppetto Joybuzz is an 8 mana 6/6 legendary minion with battle cry. Draw 2 minions from your deck, set their attack, health, and cost to 1. So I think this card is a card that helps facilitate combo decks rather than being something that will make a combo deck viable. The reason being that if you kind of fail your combo by drawing your minions, that you need to draw with Geppetto, that's a problem. So either you need to have some way to shuffle them in, which is pretty much just Rogue, really, that can do that. Other than Warlock's Plot Twist, but that doesn't really work with Geppetto. So unless you're Rogue, and you can shuffle minions in and then get them with Geppetto, it's not really going to work. So I'm as much as I would like this card to be really good, I think that if you can get two like very good Battle Cry minions, like we saw with Barista Lynchin, then you can play them for 1, and then the attack and health doesn't matter, to kind of make up for the tempo you lose from playing an 8-mana 6/6. But we're talking like turn 10 and some marginal gains in tempo. That's not really when tempo matters anyway. So I think Geppetto Joybuzz is going to be a 2 at the most, even though I would like to maybe see him seeing a little bit more play as a combo enabler. And because we're actually recording this live on stream, I'm also going to break the fourth wall of YouTube here and chat a bit to Twitch chat. So hey Fodas, welcome. I've been doing pretty well, thanks, and you. In the meantime, let's continue with the epics now. We have Azurite Elemental. Azurite Elemental is a 5-mana 2/6 2/7 epic elemental. At the start of your turn, gain spell damage +2. So obviously, if this just came with spell damage +2 naturally, that would be really powerful. I don't know. I think this stacks in my understanding. So if Azurite Elemental sticks for 4 turns, you'll get spell damage +8. But realistically, if you're in a position where you have a 5-mana 2/7 that's able to stick for 5 turns, that's pretty ridiculous. The one reasonable use of this card that I've heard is playing it with Elemental Invocation, the 0-mana mage spell that reduces the cost of an elemental you would play. The next elemental you would play by 2 this turn. So theoretically, you can play this on 3. Then we can definitely expect it to stick for 1 turn, maybe 2 turns. And then if you've got spell damage +4, you're probably able to go face for a lot with the mage spells. I mean, even we're just talking like Cinderstorm or Arcane Missiles would be pretty insane. So I think that might be the one reasonable application. But if you're going to be cheating out elementals, there's probably much better ones to cheat out. So I think Azurite Elemental is going to get a 2 from me at the most. I fail to see other scenarios where actually getting the spell damage is going to be a reliable enough way to build a win condition around it. And that's the big issue I have with Azurite Elemental. Next we have Batterhead. Batterhead is an 8-mana 3/12 epic minion with Rush. After this attacks and kills a minion, it may attack again. So theoretically you can play this. If your opponent has 4 3/3s on the board, you can kill all of them with Batterhead for 8 mana. Now, killing 4 3/3s for 8 mana doesn't really sound that good. I mean, we could just play Twisting Nether in Warlock, kill a lot more. We could play Flame Strike in Mage and kill those same minions. We could play Hagatha's Scheme after it upgrades a bit and kill 3/3s. We could play Hellfire and kill the 3/3s. So I really don't see Batterhead as a way to clear minions actually being viable. I think that Batterhead is meant to be something that you can kill maybe 1 or 2 minions and it sticks around as a threat the following turns. Or maybe something that could kill 2 big minions in Priest with Inner Fire, where you can make it a 12/12 rusher for 9. That's the one other Fringe application I can see. But overall, I just don't actually think Batterhead's that good. So I'm going to give Batterhead a 1. Next we have Big Bad Archmage. It's a 10-mana 6/6 epic minion. At the start of your turn, summon a random 6-cost minion. Now, I haven't really done the analysis as to how 6-cost minions shake up. I don't know what the average stats distribution is, but there's a lot of cards that have a lot of card text. Card text means they usually don't have a great stats. So it's going to make this a lot more unreliable, I think. I just don't see a reason to play this card unless you can find some way to cheat it out. like with some kind of recruit effect or something like that. And even then, this is not a particularly big payoff for a recruit effect. So I just think Big Bad Archmage is a straight up 1 for me. Next we have Hench Clan Hag. Hench Clan Hag is a 4 mana 3/3 epic minion with Battle Cry. Summon 2 1/1 amalgams with all minion types. So all minion types means we're talking mech, totem, beast, murloc, and something else. I think I'm forgetting one in there. Demon, right there, demon. It doesn't include treants, which would actually be because that's not a minion type yet, even though it's a theme and druid. So yeah, we're talking 4 mana, 5/5 stats. That's pretty good. Getting it across multiple bodies is fairly solid. This is this isn't really something comparable to like a Giggling Inventor, where we got 5 mana for 4/5 stats, but with the Divine Shields and that just made it so much harder to kill. Hench Clan Thug, we've got no such protection here on these amalgams, no taunts, no Divine Shields, nothing like that. Instead, we do get synergy from those minion types in Shaman, possibly, in Hunter, possibly, in Warlock, possibly. And Warlock is probably the place I see the best home for this, because it gives you 2 demons. There's quite a bit of demon synergy in this expansion, as well as even in some of the previous expansions. And having the multiple split bodies is going to work well in in Zoo, which is I think going to be one of the preeminent Warlock decks going forward. So that's really where I'm looking at Hench Clan Thug finding some application, possibly in other token-ish decks, like Token Druid, or in Murloc Shaman, if that turns out to be a thing. We'll see when we get to the Murloc cards and discuss that. I mean, the Shaman cards, sorry, and discuss that a little bit more in depth. But I think Hench Clan Hag is probably going to get a 3 from me. I think this card could easily turn out to be a 4, but I think that we want to be a little bit cautious. The stats distribution is good, but the all minion types can sometimes be a downfall, especially in Specialist, where you might have opponents teching in like Hungry Crabs or something like that. Hey, Fodas, what do I think of the expansion? Well, I mean, we're about to find out everything I think about the expansion, going through all the cards individually. Overall, though, I think it's looking fairly good, to be honest. I'm pretty excited. But I suppose I always kind of get excited at these points right before the expansion comes out anyway. And I enjoy doing all these review videos and stuff as well, so that makes a difference. Next, we have Magic Carpet. Magic Carpet is a 3 mana 1/6 epic minion. That reads, after you play a 1-cost minion, give it +1 attack and rush. So obviously it's a 3 mana 1/6, pretty good for sticking on turn 3, but you're not really getting much tempo there, so you have to make up for it by playing some 1-cost minions afterwards. At best, you're going to play 4 1-cost minions after this. They all have rush, but 1-cost minions don't tend to have very much health. So +1 attack and rush. I mean, the best case scenario is you're playing 1/3s and then you get some 2/3 rushes, which are very good. But you still are only really going to be able to clear like an opponent's wide board with that, right? That's kind of where that's going to be useful. So I'm not really sure Magic Carpet is enough of a payoff. I mean, the only real deck I can see one wanting to play this is something like Zoo, once again, where you actually can afford to have a lot of these 1-drops because you have a deck, or you have a class where you can just use Life Tap. And that's kind of the only way to make up for the downside of playing tons of 1-drops. I mean, we learned that a while ago with Quest Hunter, that that the payoffs for just playing lots of 1-drops have to be really high, and most importantly, you actually need to be able to draw them properly. And that's I think the issue with Magic Carpet. So I think Magic Carpet is probably just going to be a 1 from me. I think it could be a little bit higher, but I'm going to be a bit harsh on it and give it a 1. Next up, we have Portal Overfiend. Portal Overfiend is a 6 mana 5/6 demon. It's an epic, and it reads Battle Cry. Shuffle 3 portals into your deck. When drawn, summon a 2/2 demon with rush. So I actually hadn't even looked at this card before. My first thoughts, obviously, there's synergy with the Jumbo Imp that we'll see in Warlock, in that this can get you a lot of demons dead for that. There's a little bit of synergy with Rogue for something like Myra's Unstable Element. We used to get the Folderized Strider spiders off of that when we played it, but now we're gonna be in a scenario where the Folderized Striders are rotating out. We still have Myras, so we want to make up for the tempo loss when we actually play Myras. So maybe we could play a Portal Overfiend. As a 6-mana 5/6 though, it's a little bit understated. You don't really get it as early. The minions you get are nowhere near as good as the Folderized Spooders were. So I think even there, it's only a vague consideration. I think, if this was a world where Gul'dan was still around and even Warlock was still around, this might be a consideration. But I'm not really seeing all the demon payoffs coming together yet. We'll see when we get to Warlock. But I think I'm going to give this a 2 because I think the card is not so bad in and of itself. But the synergies to get the demon payoffs might not quite be there yet. Next we have Unseen Saboteur. So Unseen Saboteur is a 6-mana 5/6 epic minion, with Battle Cry. Your opponent casts a random spell from their hand, targets chosen randomly. This is straight up a tech card to try and counter decks where your opponent wants to hold a spell for a while for some part of a combo. Let's say like a Sinister Strike, they're holding on for their Malygos to come down, a Mind Blast, a Moonfire, obviously for all the Malygos decks where your opponent has to hold on to a couple of spell damage spells, this can help. It's not as big as like getting the Malygos out of their hand because they might have multiple spell damage alternatives to use with the Malygos in those cases. So I think the card is fairly reasonable. 6-mana 5/6, obviously not that great, but at best it's only ever really going to be a card we see in the sideboard of Specialist, unless there's combo decks being extremely popular on ladder. I don't think we'll see this much on ladder, so I'm going to give it a tech card rating. I think this is just straight up a sideboard card. There's not really much else. You can't really rate it on a normal 1 to 5 scale. If Specialist wasn't a thing, this would probably just be a 1, quite frankly. Because if you really want to kill combo decks that have to sit around and hold on to spells, just hit them in the face. If you want to do that on ladder, if they're that prevalent. I don't really think you need to play Unseen Saboteur to do that. So yeah, I think it's really just a tech card. Next we have Whirlwind Tempest. Whirlwind Tempest is an 8-mana 6/6 elemental, epic once again, and your minions with Wind Fury have Mega Wind Fury. So Mega Wind Fury means instead of being able to attack twice, they can attack 4 times. Obviously, if you manage to stick a Wind Fury minion and play Whirlwind Tempest, that could be game ending in and of itself. You can obviously play Whirlwind Tempest plus Wind Fury, the Shaman spell, on the same turn on turn 10 for a bunch of damage. The other interesting thing is maybe reducing this with something like Dream Pet or Florist when it's in your hand, but we don't really have Wind Fury payoffs in Druid. The only Wind Fury charge minion in the game is Alakir, which is obviously the natural kind of combination with Whirlwind Tempest. If you could play both of those in a turn somehow with some shenanigans, then that would be pretty good. But overall, we just don't see Wind Fury minions stick enough for Whirlwind Tempest to be that good. I mean, the minion that was most likely to get Wind Fury and stick was pretty much Vicious Fledgling, and that's not around anymore. So I'm not really sure what Whirlwind Tempest is actually going to ever be giving Mega Wind Fury to. So I'm going to give Whirlwind Tempest a 1. Hey, Odia. Welcome. Yeah, it's been a while since I streamed, so that's fair enough. Next up, we have Arcane Watcher. Arcane Watcher is a 3-mana 5/6 rare minion. can't attack unless you have spell damage. So this means if either you have a weapon with spell damage, which we'll see a bit later in Hunter, or if one of your minions has spell damage. Those are the only real ways you can get spell damage. So it's a little bit of an upgrade in stats on Ancient Watcher, obviously. It has a much better effect than Ancient Watcher. Obviously, you can still silence it to attack, which we will see. There's a couple ways of doing that, especially in Priest once again. Or you can actually just go for a strategy where you actually play some spell damage stuff alongside this. This is going to be very important for the evolution type effects that we'll see, because this is obviously something you have to consider when evolving from 2-cost to 3-cost stuff. The other place that this has a reasonable chance of being able to attack is in Shaman, where you can just roll the spell power totem to enable it to attack. So I think Arcane Watcher, I can only really give it a 2 at the most, because most decks are not actually going to be able to play this. But I think it is a good card in the decks where it is playable. So I don't know, maybe that actually just means it should be a 3. I think it may even be alongside some of the other overstated cards we're going to see, maybe enough of a reason to play those decks. So I think maybe I've kind of talked myself into a 3, but I'm not sure that deck is something we're actually going to see all that much of, to be honest. Next up, we have Exotic Mount Seller. Exotic Mount Seller is a 7 mana, 5/8 rare minion. Whenever you cast a spell, summon a random 3-cost beast. So random 3-cost beasts, the low rolls are stuff like Ironbeak Owl, the high rolls, stuff like Mooklas. So we're talking anything from 2/1 stats to 5/5 stats. Jungle Panther is pretty good as well at 4/2 with stealth. People compare this to Gadgetzan Auctioneer, but the issue with that is Gadgetzan Auctioneer fuels himself by drawing more cheap spells that are in your deck, so you can play them and draw more. Whereas Mount Seller, you have to like save spells and then play them with Mount Seller to make up on tempo. Now, if you've been saving cheap spells, you're probably getting behind on board, and that's the big problem I have with this card. Like, it's definitely something in a deck that just has plentiful spells and wants to go with a token strategy that can be a way to generate tokens, but this can never be the core of your deck. And even in a lot of those decks, there's probably hopefully going to be better ways to generate tokens a lot of the time. So I think at best, I have to only give Exotic Mount Seller a 2. I think it's really just something that might see some fringe play in decks where they can afford to run a bunch of cheap spells, but are not entirely reliant on this idea of going wide on the board. Next up, we have Hecklebot. Hecklebot is a 4-mana, 3/8 rare mech. It has Taunt and Battle Cry. Your opponent summons a minion from their deck. So this is another classic tech card. A way to draw out your opponent's Malygos and then kill it. With only using 4 mana, there's a decent chance that you'll have enough mana spare to kill any minion that comes out in a lot of classes. The problem with this, though, the problem with this is that it still has to be in their deck. So if they're like a 1-minion combo deck for some reason, or they have... let's say there's like a Malygos, right? Let's say they're a Malygos deck. Now, if they've drawn Malygos, your tech card just fails entirely. Like, yes, you could pull out other minions that might be in their deck to try and help them with the Malygos, but you don't hit the Malygos. So you don't counter the entire tech. And that's the problem I have with Hecklebot. Like, I think this is a much worse design and a worse card than Dirty Rat, because Dirty Rat was... pretty solid in the non just against the non-combo decks, where you could play it at times and kind of benefit from that. And Dirty Rat meant that you were actually trying to actively make more hand reads in order to determine what was likely to be in your opponent's hand, and therefore what you were likely to pull out of their hand and onto the board. Whereas Hecklebot is pulling from the deck. Now, the problem with that is you're just a lot more reliant on RNG, because you're reliant on the draw RNG, and them not drawing the combo card they need. And then you have to hit that combo card, assuming it's not the only minion in their deck. So I really don't like Hecklebot that much. I absolutely love the flavor. That's pretty much the only thing that's really saving it for me. I think this just, once again, this is just a classic tech card. I can't really give it an individual rating. I don't think it would be particularly good on ladder, but it is definitely something that can be useful in the specialist format. Next up, we have Mad Summoner. Mad Summoner is a 6-mana 4/4 demon. Battle Cry, fill each player's board with 1/1 imps. So I hadn't really looked at this card much before as well. This obviously came out in the last bit of the spoilers last night. Filling your opponent's board with demons is obviously not particularly good. If you play this on a completely empty board, you get 10-10 worth of stats. They get 7-7 worth of stats. And then they have the initiative on all the imps, and that seems very terrible to me. The best case scenario is playing this in Warlock with the 3-mana card that deals 1 damage to all your opponent's minions and buffs your demons by 1 attack. So then we've paid 9 mana to get 17-10 stats and to deal 1 damage to all our opponent's minions. I'm still not particularly excited about that. Maybe there's some ways that you can abuse the fact that you're actually putting minions on your opponent's side of the board, like messing with resurrection pools and priest, for instance. So maybe there's some application as a tech card there, but overall I think it's pretty much just going to be a 1 most of the time. I think that this is pretty trash, to be honest, outside of its very fringe tech card applications. But I don't think this is something that we seriously consider as a tech card in like the vast majority of metas. Next up, we have Portal Keeper, another demon, a 4-mana 5/2 rare. Battle Cry, shuffle 3 portals into your deck. When drawn, summon 5/2 demon with Rush. So the same text as the other demon we saw earlier, but with a different stat line. At 4-mana 5/2, it gets you them earlier in the game, which means you have a higher chance of drawing the demons earlier in the game. The demons are obviously better the earlier you draw them, because 2 damage by itself is not that strong, but the earlier in the game it is, the more effect it might have. I think this is worse than the 6-mana 5/6 though, just because this body is really weak by itself. Once again, there's some vague opportunity for this to be useful in something like Zoo, or in, well, pretty much Zoo, where you have like the Jumbo Imp stuff. But I'm not sure if these 2 portal minions can really make the deck work. But I do like the mechanic they're kind of working with. I think, though, overall, 4-mana 5/2 stats is the problem here. That's all you get immediately, and that's really bad. So I think I'm going to have to give Portal Keeper a 1. And next up, we would have another card, but my overlay is not feeling like behaving. There we go. Okay. Recurring Villain. Recurring Villain is a 5-mana 3/6 rare minion with Death Rattle. If this minion has 4 or more attack, resummon it. So, I mean, we're looking at like Grim Rally as a way to buff this. If this is next to a Direwolf Alpha when it dies, which is pretty unlikely. Raid Leader. I mean, there's a couple ways to buff this, but I think it's going to be pretty hard to do so. There's some interesting... I'm not sure how this works with Necrium Blade in Rogue. If you can buff it with, like, let's say a Cold Blood, and then you Necrium Blade, will you get 2 copies of it? Like, will you get a 3/6 to trigger off the Death Rattle? If you do, maybe that's okay. But overall, I don't think Recurring Villain is going to be recurring on many of our boards and in many of our nightmares. So I think recurring villain is just going to be a 1 from me. Next we have Sunreaver Warmage. Sunreaver Warmage is a 5 and a 4/4 rare minion with Battle Cry. If you're holding a spell that costs 5 or more, deal 4 damage. So I think if we looked at this in the current meta, this card would be very strong. There's at least 2 decks that would proc this very often, being Druid, because they've got lots of big spells, everything from Nourish, Spreading Plague, all the way up to Ultimate Infestation. And Mage, where they literally are big spell mage, built around Dragon's Fury and that. But the issue is cards like UI are rotating, cards like Dragon Fury are rotating, cards like Arcane Tyrant are rotating, I think. So ultimately, the concern here is that you actually need to find decks where you're actually often going to be holding these 5 or more cost spells. One of them might be Rogue. Maybe you're holding on to Myra's Unstable Element, or some of the decks play 1 Myra's. Well, you can only play 1 Myra's, but Myra's and 1 Sprint, in which case you've got 2 spells that can proc it. But 2 spells that can proc it is probably not enough for your Sunreaver Warmage to be consistent. And as Rogue, you have other ways to get tempo that are probably just better. So I don't really think we want to do it there. Druid is another consideration because we still have all the ramp options, the Nourishes. Nourish, that is, pretty much. And Forest's Guide, the 1 twin spell. So that's maybe a consideration. Then we've also got Shaman. The big thing that for me that's interesting with Shaman is you can play Storm Chaser on 4, the 4 mana 3/4 that tutors or fetches a 5 mana cost or more spell from your deck. That will mean your Sunreaver Warmage is activated immediately. And then it's pretty powerful. I think when this effect is activated, it's powerful, but I'm just not sure these decks are going to be that common. I think you need to be running at least 4 big spells to make Sunreaver Warmage reliable on turn 5. And if you are running 4 big spells, you kind of need to be almost like a control deck. I mean, maybe Sunreaver Warmage is just a good enough tool for those control decks. I mean, even Priest, right? We have Mass Hysteria, but then we have Psychic Scream rotating out. So do we really want... We also have the Spellstone rotating out, although you wouldn't play this in a deck with the Spellstone. So what are the big spells that we're holding on to? So yeah, I think Sunreaver Warmage is going to get a 3 from me because I think it's a really good card. I'm just not sure the decks are really there right now to support it. That's the biggest issue. Next we have Tunnel Blaster. Tunnel Blaster is a 7 mana 3/8. A 7 mana 3/7 rare minion with Taunt and Death Rattle. Deal 3 damage to all minions. So the Death Rattle's pretty good. The problem being that your opponent's going to be able to trade all their smaller minions into this, and they get initiative on choosing how the Death Rattle goes off, and that's a problem. The one deck where this obviously could seem viable is in a Death Rattle Rogue, where you can activate this Death Rattle with Necrium Blade when you play Tunnel Blaster. It's a really good way for that deck to tech against aggro, to defend itself better, but I think that's actually where you'll only ever see this card. If Death Rattle Rogue is good enough to play in Specialist, this is a card that can help you in your sideboard to tech more against aggro. So I think that's really where we most likely see Tunnel Blaster. There's no Play Dead anymore in Standard for us to go like Tunnel Blaster, Play Dead in Hunter, for instance. So I think Tunnel Blaster is actually fairly good, but I'm still only going to give it a 2. And really, it's probably more of a tech card rating for the Rogue case, at least. But I think it's something that could see play outside of just being a tech card. So I'm going to give it a 2 for seeing Fringe play. Next, we have Underbelly Ooze. Underbelly Ooze is a 7 mana 3/5 rare minion. After this minion survives damage, summon a copy of it. So I assume this copy will have the damage on it as well, which is different to the way Grim Patron worked. That's what I've seen people compare this to a lot. Grim Patron, you got a full new version of the minion at 3/3 stats, whereas Underbelly Ooze, you get a copy. Much like with all the oozes, all the kind of oozes we've seen before, like Echoing Ooze, that's the one I'm thinking of. So what that means is if you can buff Underbelly Ooze and then trade, then the copy becomes pretty powerful. But the rest of the time, playing 7 mana for a 3/5 sucks. So I'm going to have to say that Underbelly Ooze is a 1. Next, we have Arcane Servant. Moving on to the commons. It's a 2 mana, 2/3 elemental common. Not really much to say about this. It helps you fulfill your curve. A lot of the elemental synergies are rotating, though, because they came from Agoro. So I'm not really sure why we need to curve elementals anymore. I don't really see the benefit of playing this over many of the other 2 mana 2/3s in the game. So I'm going to have to give this a 1. Vanilla stat minions are just not good. Next we have Burly Shovelfist. Burly Shovelfist is a 9 mana 9/9 rush. If a spell said 9 mana deal 9 damage to a minion, we would never play that. If a spell said like 9 mana 9 damage, deal 9 damage to a minion, like Overkill, summon a 9x, where x is the overkill damage. That's basically what Burly Shovelfist is, except that it can't get through taunts, can't deal with stealth stuff. But I mean, mostly the big difference is it can't get through taunts, right? Whereas the spell could. I mean, I think this just pales in comparison to almost all the hard removal that exists in most classes. So I think Burly Shovelfist is a 1. Next, Dalaran Crusader, 5 mana 5/4 Divine Shield. Those stats are not exciting. When you're getting towards 5 mana, you need to give me a lot more than just Divine Shield. I mean, we're happy to play 1 mana 1/1s with Divine Shield, but Divine Shield is kind of worth. We're getting approximately the right amount of stats there. Here we're overpaying, and the Divine Shield, whilst it is better on more powerful minions, is probably still not really worth it on the Dalaran Crusader. So I'm going to give Dalaran Crusader a 1. Okay, sorry. And then next up we have Dalaran Librarian. Dalaran Librarian's a 2 mana 2/3 common minion, Battlecry, silence adjacent minions. So this is a activator for the 3 mana Arcane Watcher that we saw. It also can activate the 2 mana 4/5 one, whose name I just forgot, even though the classic one. So that's basically what this is for, right? Silencing your own minions to activate them for those kind of self-silence decks. Not really something I think we're going to see much play outside of those decks. It is better than playing Purify in many cases because you get the tempo straight away. So we should consider that. It can unfreeze minions. That's another consideration for Dalaran Librarian. If we saw lots of freeze effects in the meta, it could be a tech card for that. And if you have negative death rattles, it can help you dodge those negative death rattles. But I think at best, Dalaran Librarian is a fringe card. So it's going to be a 2, maybe a 3 for the specific silence decks. But it's not really going to be the only way they can silence, and there might just be other options for those decks as to different ways to play anyway. Next we have Eccentric Scribe. Eccentric Scribe is a 6 mana 6/4 common minion with Death Rattle. Summon 4 1/1 Vengeful Scrolls. 6 mana 6/4 stats, those really suck. That late in the game, the 1/1s are just not as impactful. I don't really see a reason to play this over many of the other more powerful token generation cards. So I'm going to give Eccentric Scribe a 1. Next we have Evil Cable Rat. And this is the first card related to the Lackey sub-theme in Rise of Shadows. This is a 2 mana 1/1 common beast with Battle Cry, add a Lackey to your hand. So now we can have a look at what the different lackeys are. They're all 1 mana 1/1 minions. There's 5 of them for now, and they're going to add more over time. So to start off with, they basically got one themed on each of the evil villains in the set. So we have Faceless Lackey. So 1 mana, 1/1. That's a battle cry. Summon a random 2-cost minion. So good tempo. I'm not going to read out the mana cost and the stats for the rest of these, just their effect. Goblin Lackey. Give a friendly minion +1 attack and rush. Can be fairly powerful, but I mean, it's something you need to... Giving minions rush is actually not really worth that much, we've found out. In this case, giving them +1 attack can help, especially in zoo-type decks, but generating the lackeys might not be all that easy for those type of decks anyway. Next, we have Cobalt Lackey, 1 mana... 1 mana, 1/1. Obviously, Battle Cry, deal 2 damage. This seems like one of the stronger ones to me. Very versatile effect. Can go face, can kill minions. It just seems to be a very, very useful effect. Not always the most powerful on the swingy, but a very, very reliable effect to get. And then we have Witchy Lackey, which I think is the final one. Battle Cry, transform a friendly minion into one that costs 1 more. So this is the classic evolve effect, and something that I think is going to be very important to consider, because all classes are basically going to have the ability to have access to evolve. Realistically, Evil Cable Rat is the only neutral way to generate lackeys, and I don't see most decks playing Evil Cable Rat. So we only really need to consider lackeys in a couple decks where their lackey generation cards are good. And you'll know whether you need to play around it, because you'll know whether your opponent has actually generated any lackeys. You can't put these lackeys in your deck. So getting back to Evil Cable Rat, we've seen the value of all of these witchy lackeys is better than just a 1 mana 1/1. But do we want to play a 2 mana 1/1 to draw one of these? I mean, the obvious comparison here is Novice Engineer, 2 mana 1/1 that draws you a card. The big difference being Novice Engineer is usually played in combo decks, where you specifically want to draw cards from your deck. Evil Cable Rat doesn't do that, so you need to have a very specific reason to want to draw lackeys. And I really think that it's only Rogue that actually has that reason, and Rogue doesn't really want to play a 2-drop anyway. So I think Evil Cable Rat is going to be a 2 at best. I think the lackeys are fairly good. I think the deck maybe where it could see some play is in a sacrifice kind of zoo deck, where this can be your sacrifice fodder for something like Grim Rally. But otherwise, I think the Evil Cable Rat is not all that enticing of a reason to play lackeys. Next, we have Faceless Rager. Faceless Rager, a 3 mana 5/1 common minion with Battle Cry, copy a friendly minion's health. So I think this is by far the best Rager they've made. The other maybe close to best one was the Ice Rager, which is a 3 mana 5/2. Realistically, if you play this on curve, it's not unreasonable to play a 2 mana 2/3 on curve. If you're on the play, you get the initiative as to where that 2 mana 2/3 attacks. So you can play Faceless Rager as a 3 mana 5/3 and then attack. Now, there's not many 2/4s that you can play in standard, or 4 health minions. I mean, the one on 2 mana is Belligerent Gnome. So maybe you get to play Belligerent Gnome, but that's just a 1/4 most of the time, because your opponent won't have the minions on the board to activate its Battle Cry and give it the +1 attack. So then we're playing a 3 mana 5/4. Now that's pretty good, but we also still had to play a Belligerent Gnome on 2, so is that really worth it? I think the one place that Faceless Rager might see reasonable play is in the kind of silence decks, where you play something like an Ancient Watcher, the 2 mana 4/5 on turn 2 into Faceless Rager on turn 3. Now we're playing a 3 mana 5/5, and that's pretty enticing. You know, if we played the Arcane Watcher, we're getting a 3 mana 5/6, but we obviously have to wait until turn 4, or if we're on the coin, we could coin out the Arcane Watcher into Faceless Rager. I think Faceless Rager looks really reasonable in those decks. I actually think Faceless Rager might be the Rager that actually sees some play, but specifically in those type of decks where you have very heavy health statted minions that aren't kind of costed along the normal kind of vanilla cost curve. So I think Faceless Rager is actually possibly even a 3. I think it might end up being closer towards a 2, only really seeing play in those specific decks, but I'm going to be kind and give it a 3. Next, we have Flight Master. Flight Master, 3 mana, 3/4. Battle Cry, summon a 2/2 Griffin for each player. So obviously, if you can deal with the 2/2 Griffin straight away, you're getting 3 mana, 5/6 worth of stats. That's very good. So I think in some zoo type decks, this might be a reasonable card. If you play like a 2/1 on turn 1 or something into Flight Master, and then you trade your 2/1 into their 2/2, you're kind of upgrading your 2/1 into a 2/2. So I actually think Flight Master might be pretty reasonable. It's a 3 mana 3/4 as well, so it's, you're getting fair stats on itself. The only problem is that if you don't have a way to deal with the 2/2 immediately, then you're giving your opponent the initiative on that 2/2, and that could end up costing you your Flight Master, as the Griffins might come back to bite him. So I think I'm going to have to give Flight Master a 3. I don't think it's a very powerful card, but I think that there might be enough decks where you can get away with dealing with the 2/2 you give your opponent. I mean, the biggest comparison is probably Marsh Drake, where you gave your opponent 2/1 Poisonous, and most decks couldn't really deal with that. So I suppose that should actually tell me that Flight Master is worse, because dealing with a 2/1 is much easier than dealing with a 2/2. So maybe I'm actually being ambitious here. Maybe Flight Master is actually only really a 2. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I kind of talked myself down there comparing it to Marsh Drake. So I'm going to say Flight Master is just a 2. But I think there is definitely some actual Fringe application where this might see some play. Next, we have Hench Clan Hogsteed. Hench Clan Hogsteed is a 2 mana 2/1 beast with Rush and Death Rattle. Summon a 1/1 Murloc. The Murloc is extremely cute. The effect is not bad in a decent amount of zoo decks. It can be a fairly good way to help you control the board and maintain tempo, so that you can also then, if you're trading the Hench Clan Hogsteed, instead of trading a minion on the board, you can go face with the minion on your board. So in a way, it's kind of giving you pseudo rush damage in those kind of decks where you're heavily on the board. I think Shaman might have use for this. Zoo might have use for this. Even Hunter might have use for this, because it is a beast that you can rush in and essentially kind of sacrifice to upgrade your Scavenging Hyenas, or that can synergize with a lot of your other beast-centric cards. So I'm going to give Hench Clan Hogsteed a 3. I don't think the card is, it's certainly not the best Hench Clan common that they've ever printed. It falls well short of Hench Clan Thug, but it is a fairly solid card, and there's a very, very cute Murloc in it as well, which helps. Next, we have another Hench Clan card, Hench Clan Sneak, 3 mana 3/3 with Stealth. So at first I was like, oh, that's pretty neat. 3 mana 3/3 is kind of what you expect. Stealth is quite nice, but then I kind of, Pandemonia convinced me that the Stealth is actually just not that good. There's not really that many guaranteed ways to get payoff. I mean, maybe in some decks you can like buff it afterwards. If your deck is very heavy on buffs and you don't actually necessarily have the early game to guarantee that you can, play your 3/3 and then buff it on turn 4, maybe we can find some use for Hench Clan Sneak in those decks. I'm thinking Paladin mostly. Hench Clan Sneak into Blessing of Kings is obviously very, very powerful. Excuse me. But beyond that, I'm not so sure I'm super sold on Hench Clan Sneak. So I'm going to give it a 2. It's just not as good to have a 3 mana 3/3 than having essentially a 3 mana 4/4 like we do with Hench Clan Thug. I mean, maybe I'm being a little unfair to the Sneak comparing it to the Thug. Next we have Heroic Innkeeper. Heroic Innkeeper is an 8 mana 4/4 common with Taunt, Battle Cry, gain +2/+2 for each other friendly minion. So you need to have 2 other minions for it to be an Iron Bark Protector, 8 mana, 8/8 taunt. At best, it can be an 8 mana, 16/16 taunt if you have 6 other minions. I mean, realistically, the only decks where you're going to have 6 other minions on the board and you're not already one is like Zoo. Zoo is not a deck that really wants to play an 8 mana 4/4 or even an 8 mana 10/10 taunt. Zoo doesn't want to do that. Zoo wants to cheat out its 8/8s like Sea Giants by just having lots of other minions on the board instead. So I'm just not really sure there's an application for Heroic Innkeeper. So I'm going to give Heroic Innkeeper a 1. Next, we have Mana Reservoir. Mana Reservoir is a 2 mana 0/6 elemental with spell damage +1. So, obviously, if you really want to get spell damage, this is a card that's likely to stick around, but it's not going to do anything for you whilst it sticks around. 0 attack minions tend to be very bad because your opponents can just freely trade into them at no real cost. So you really need to be making the best use out of +1 spell damage. And quite frankly, if we're talking about playing this and then playing your spell damage stuff in the same turn, you may as well just play Blood Mage Stelnos. So I don't really see the use for Mana Reservoir anytime soon. Maybe at best it could be used in some priest decks where you can actually like use Inner Fire and stuff to abuse the stats effect of it. But like what? We're going to have to go Inner Fire and Mind Blast or something in order to get, or like Inner Fire, Spirit Lash, but I think Spirit Lash is rotating out. So, I mean, sorry, Mana Reservoir, Spirit Lash. But yeah, so I think Mana Reservoir is a 1. Potion Vendor. Potion Vendor is a 1 mana 1/1 with Battle Cry. Restore 2 health to all friendly characters. So, I mean, even if we just consider this as 1 mana 1/1 restore 2 health to one thing, that's pretty good. Now, restoring 2 health to all friendly characters is extremely powerful in some Zoo decks. If we're playing like the Light Warden stuff, that can make Light Warden really scary. The problem being that we do lose Happy Ghoul to rotation. So Potion Vendor would have been insane in the Happy Ghoul type Zoo decks. Now I'm not sure that this is worth it. I think Potion Vendor might still be viable enough in Zoo decks, especially your kind of Grim Rally Zoo decks where you want to play lots of 1-drops and buff up your board repeatedly. So I think Potion Vendor is actually going to get a 3 from me. I just think it's a powerful card. I'm not really sure how many decks can actually make use of it, but I think the effect for what you're getting from the mana cost is very powerful. I mean, we can obviously also talk about Priest and how they can use it to heal with like Northshire Clerics and then gain or draw quite a lot of cards. But I'm not sure we'll see it too much in those decks as much. Next we have Proud Defender. Proud Defender is a 4 mana 2/6 with Taunt and has +2 attack while you have no other minions. So play this on turn 4 by itself. It's a 4 mana 4/6 Taunt. It's not super bad for decks control decks, let's say, that don't necessarily run that many minions. It's a fairly solid taunt body. I think of it almost as a Tar Creeper replacement, but a bit slower for those kind of decks. It doesn't work anywhere near as well in tempo decks, where Tar Creeper kind of protected your minions. So I think that's most likely where we're going to see Proud Defender. We could see it in like those kind of Inner Fire Priest decks as well, just because it has a fairly high stat, a fairly high health count for its mana cost. So it can help you get on the way to Inner Fire, Divine Spirit Inner Firing them to death. So I think Proud Defender is going to get a 3 from me, because I think it might be very solid for control decks in particular. But I can easily see myself being very wrong on this card and it actually just being trash. Next we have Safeguard. Safeguard is a card with a lot of really good flavor. It's a 6 mana 4/5 mech with Taunt and Death Rattle. Summon a 0/5 Vault Safe with Taunt. So first the Safeguard is going to try to protect you, and then after you get past the Safeguard, the Vault Safe is going to protect you. So you've got you can hide a lot of loot right behind these two, or in our case, hide a lot of our faces behind them. I'm just not really sure that late in the game, 6 mana 4/5 is really worth it when the back end Taunt's body is once again 0 attack. I think that's a big issue. I think Safeguard is probably only a 2. I actually think the 4 mana 2/6, or the card we saw just before this, is probably better for a lot of control decks. And so I'm just not really sure Safeguard is going to find a home to guard. So I think Safeguard is probably just a 2. Next we have Soldier of Fortune. Soldier of Fortune is a 4 mana 5/6 elemental common. Whenever this minion attacks, give your opponent a coin. We've had a Hungry Dragon, which is a 4 mana 5/6 that Death Rattle gave your opponent 2 coins. Realistically, you'd expect this thing to attack at least twice, so you're giving your opponent 2 coins. Sure, those are kind of not immediate, and if your opponent just deals with this straight away, they don't get the coins. That's a pretty big factor. This could once again be something that works in the Silence Priest type decks. Once again, it's overstated for its cost. If you silence it, you get rid of that effect. So all of these cards are kind of making that 2 mana 2/3 silence guy look a lot better. Overall, though, I don't see Soldier of Fortune being one of the premier cards in those types of decks. It's not one of the main reasons to silence your own stuff. And I'm just not really sure it does that. Like, giving your opponent a coin is a pretty big disadvantage. And the thing you want with lots of stats is for it to stick around. And the longer this sticks around, the worse the disadvantage gets. So I'm going to have to just give Soldier of Fortune a 2. I think it would be very close to a 1 if it wasn't for this kind of silence mechanic deck theme that seems to be popping around a bit. Next up, we have Spellbook Binder. Spellbook Binder is a 2 mana 3/2 with Battlecry. If you have spell damage, draw a card. 2 mana 3/2 that draws a card, very good. Having spell damage, maybe not that easy. The easiest way to stick spell damage around is once again the Hunter legendary weapon that we'll see later. So Spellbook Binder, I think, is probably just a 2 at best. I mean, you can play this and Thalnos in the same turn. I mean, it's a 2 mana 3/2, but having the spell damage is pretty damn hard. So I actually think most of the time it's just a vanilla 2 mana 3/2. So I'm going to actually say it's a 1. Next we have Spellwood Jeweler. Spellwood Jeweler is a 3 mana 3/4 with Battlecry. Your hero can't be targeted by spells or hero powers until next turn. Once again, clearly a very much a tech card for Specialist. The problem with this is you can still get attacked in the face by all their minions and stuff. So it's not like Timeout or something like that can actually keep you alive through the combos. Or against any deck for like a turn. It's not going to help you stall. It's only going to stall against combo decks specifically. Or, like a deck that needs to burn you down to finish you off. Or like Malygos style combo decks where they're going to use the direct damage face spells after playing Malygos. So I think that's very much what this card is a response to, those types of decks. Possibly because they didn't actually rotate out Malygos, which a lot of people would have expected them to do. Then next we have Sunreaver Spy. Oh, sorry. So Sunreaver Jeweler, pretty much just getting the tech card rating here. That's all we can really give it. Sunreaver Spy is a 2 mana 2/3 with Battlecry. If you control a secret, gain +1/+1. So obviously the secret classes, Mage, Hunter, Paladin, and then kind of Rogue. Although I think a couple of the Rogue secrets are rotating out. I'm not sure if there's actually going to be any left in Standard. But anyway, we're mostly going to be looking at this in the context of Paladin, because that's the class that can play a secret on turn 1, and then into Sunreaver Spy. I think that in that deck, Sunreaver Spy is very, very good. I think Sunreaver Spy is at least easily a 3, maybe even a 4 in that deck. It's hard to give a neutral like this a 4 when it's not going to see much play outside of those decks. But I actually am going to go out on a limb and give it a 4 just because I think it's extremely powerful. And with the options that Paladin has for playing secrets on one and then like getting payoffs for that, I think it might be reasonable enough to do that. So I can see some very strong curves where you just keep a secret and Sunreaver Spy in the mulligan, and you can just be playing 2 mana 2/3s on turn. Sorry, 3/4s on turn 2, as I kind of harken back to Totem Golem days. There's no real coining them out though. But like if you're a hunter, you can coin out a secret on turn 1 into Sunreaver Spy. I mean, that's another option. So I think Sunreaver Spy is a 4 purely for the Paladin deck. If the Paladin deck is bad, then I think Sunreaver Spy goes all the way down to a 2. So yeah, I mean, I think I'm just gonna stick my neck on the line on this one and give it a 4. Next we have Toxfin. Toxfin is a 1 mana 1/2 Murloc with give a friendly Murloc poisonous. This effect is very powerful. Murlocs tend to be fairly small minions. We'll see with Shaman later that we're getting a lot more kind of tokeny Murlocs. We also had the one that comes out of the Henge Clan Boar. The Henge Clan Boar, the 2 mana 2/1 rush. So Toxfin, I think, is a very, very powerful card. I just don't really know how many decks are actually going to play enough Murlocs to make it reasonable. So I'm going to say it's just a 3, because of just the lack of decks that are really going to want to play Murlocs. I think mostly it's going to be Shaman, obviously, and then maybe we're looking at a bit of Zoo having some Murlocs. But I mean, yeah, Toxfin is just so good for zoo type decks that actually play Murlocs, because you can just trade up your puny little 1-drops or 1/1s or small little Murlocs up into anything, and that's pretty powerful. I mean, even just combining Toxfin with Bluegill Warrior, like, that's not so bad. If I get to pay 3 mana to kill anything without going through Taunt, and then get a 1/2, I think I would take that in a lot of decks. So obviously the problem is you have to draw both of those in combination. They cost 2 cards, but yeah, I think Toxfin seems fairly solid to me, so I'm going to give Toxfin a 3. Next, Traveling Healer. Traveling Healer is a 4 mana 3/2 with Divine Shield and Battle Cry, restore 3 health. Now, a lot of people compare this to Ziliax, but there's a huge difference here in that the maximum healing on Traveling Healer is 3. Unlike Ziliax, who can often heal you for 6, sometimes even 9. You can't get that out of Traveling Healer. It's obviously, it can't magnetic onto things. So, I mean, in those cases, Ziliax can heal you for even more, where you actually manage to stick Ziliax magnetic onto another mech. And another issue is that Traveling Healer doesn't have Taunt. So whilst, let's say, Ziliax kills one minion and your opponent has to attack into it with another, you've actually not just healed 6, you've healed the damage that Ziliax stopped from going to your face, and if Ziliax actually kills that minion, you've killed 2 minions. Now, Traveling Healer, maybe it can heal you 3, but your opponent can still just go face then, and then they can you can trade like with your Traveling Healer after that, but you've not really netted much in terms of healing as a result. I mean, maybe we could see this in Druid if they really need some healing cards, but I don't think so. I'm going to give Traveling Healer a 1. Next we have Violet Spellsword, 4 mana 1/6 with Battle Cry, gain +1 attack for each spell in your hand. What do we need this to be? A 4 mana 5/6 to be really good. So we need to have 5 spells in our hand, which means we need to have 5 cards in our hand at least. So 6 cards, including Violet Spellsword on turn 4. That doesn't seem all that likely, or if it is, we're quite far behind on the board, and they can probably just trade favorably into Violet Spellsword. So all of this is telling me that Violet Spellsword is just a 1. Next we have Violet Warden. Violet Warden is a 6 mana 4/7 with Taunt and spell damage +1. Power creep on Archmage, as Pandemonia pointed out to me. So I mean, this is pretty much just a 1. I don't see this being playable. Archmage isn't playable. Obviously, this has Taunt, which is a pretty big difference. but I don't think this is playable. This is relevant because it is one of the like random 6-cost minions, which obviously matters for the Lackey evolves, and it matters for the mage effect, the mage card, the 8-mana spell that we'll see, and it also matters for that big bad archmage. So I mean, it's like relevant for those factors, but it's not something we actually ever want to put in our deck. And that kind of takes us all the way back to the beginning. Violet Warden's actually the last neutral. So yeah, that was a fairly long review of the neutrals. Next up, we're going to be jumping straight into the different classes. But yeah, thanks for watching. If you're watching this on YouTube, and make sure you stick around for the other videos, and make sure to also hit that subscribe. You can find me on Twitter down here, and you can also find my Twitch stream from there.